A few weeks later, the chaotic symphony of Genevieve's household had seamlessly expanded to include 3 very large, very loud men. Saturday mornings usually consisted of Genevieve trying to maintain order, but today, her living room had been transformed into an indoor camping ground. Blankets were draped over dining chairs, creating an intricate tunnel system that Quan and Tae-jin were currently trying to navigate on their stomachs, much to the amusement of Wyatt and Caleb. Sung-min was in the kitchen, wearing a pink apron that belonged to Genevieve, covered in flour, and aggressively whisking pancake batter. He had an enormous smudge of batter on his nose, and he was currently arguing with Hazel about the appropriate ratio of chocolate chips. "You cannot just pour the whole bag, Hazel," Sung-min reasoned, tapping the wooden spoon against the bowl. "It disrupts the structural integrity of the pancake." Hazel crossed her arms, fixing him with a stormy gray glare that perfectly mirrored his own. "More chocolate means more structure. It is basic science." Genevieve leaned against the doorframe, sipping her coffee, her chest expanding with a warmth she was still trying to get used to. He fit here so perfectly. He had moved his base of operations to a local office building, completely upending his life, just to make sure he was there to make pancakes on a Saturday. Then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a text from a local client, but the screen displayed a blocked international number. A cold, heavy stone dropped in her stomach. She slipped out of the kitchen, walking down the short hallway to her bedroom, and gently closing the door before answering. "Hello," she said, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper. "Genevieve." The voice was like shattered glass, elegant, sharp, and dripping with disdain. It was a voice Genevieve had not heard in 4 years, yet it still possessed the power to make her hands tremble. Sung-min's mother. "I see you have decided to ruin my son's life again," the older woman continued smoothly, not waiting for a response. "I warned you what would happen, Genevieve. He is meant for greatness, and you are nothing but an anchor dragging him into mediocrity. He is supposed to be finalizing his marriage to a woman of his own standing today, yet he is playing house in the snow. If you do not let him go, I will make sure this little fantasy of yours is crushed. You have no idea the resources I possess." The line went dead. Genevieve stared at the blank screen, the air suddenly completely stripped from her lungs. The panic, the exact same visceral terror that had made her pack her bags at 20, flooded her veins. His mother had not changed. The threat was still real, looming over their fragile happiness. She needed air. She needed to talk to Sung-min. She walked out of her bedroom, bypassing the blanket fort in the living room, and grabbed her coat. Quan mentioned Sung-min had stepped outside to take a quick delivery of firewood. Genevieve pushed open the front door, the crisp winter air hitting her face, but she froze on the porch. Sung-min was standing near the end of the driveway, but he was not looking at firewood. He was standing with a stunning, elegantly dressed Korean woman. She looked immaculate, wearing a tailored cashmere coat that screamed generational wealth. And Sung-min was hugging her. It was not a brief, polite embrace. His arms were wrapped around her shoulders, his head bent close to hers. The stone in Genevieve's stomach shattered into jagged pieces of sheer jealousy and heartbreak. His mother's words echoed in her ears. "He is supposed to be finalizing his marriage today." Genevieve stepped back, pulling the door shut as quietly as she could. Her mind was spinning out of control. She had been foolish. She had let him back in, let him make pancakes for her kids, let herself believe that love was enough to conquer an empire. She rushed back to her bedroom, pulling a duffel bag from the top of her closet. Her flight response was fully activated. She just needed to get the kids and go. They could go to her sister's place in Toronto. Just pack and leave before her heart got completely destroyed a second time. She pulled a stack of sweaters from her drawer, her vision blurring with hot, angry tears. "Mommy?" Genevieve gasped, dropping the sweaters. Stella was standing in the doorway, clutching a slightly squished stuffed rabbit. The little girl's brow was furrowed in concern, her stormy gray eyes looking up at Genevieve. "Are you okay, Mommy?" Stella asked, walking over and placing her tiny hand on Genevieve's knee. "Why are you crying?" Genevieve quickly wiped her eyes, forcing a shaky smile. "I am fine, sweetie. Mommy is just organizing." Stella looked at the duffel bag, then back at Genevieve. "Are we going somewhere?" "I do not want to go. I want to stay here. I love having the pizza man around. He makes the best bear noises, and he promised to teach me how to build a snow castle today." The absolute innocence and pure joy in her daughter's voice acted like a bucket of ice water over Genevieve's panic. Stella loved him. Wyatt, Caleb, and Hazel loved him. He was their father. He had proven, every single day for the past month, that he was utterly devoted to them. She was about to pack them up and run away because of one phone call and one hug, without even giving the man who slept on her floor a chance to explain. She took a deep breath, dropping the duffel bag to the floor. She picked Stella up, pressing a fierce kiss to her curly hair. "We are not going anywhere," Genevieve whispered, her voice steadying. "Go tell your brothers to wash their hands for pancakes, okay?" Stella nodded happily and trotted out of the room. Genevieve wiped her face, squaring her shoulders. She was not 20 anymore. She was a mother, a digital storyteller, a woman who had built a life with her bare hands. She was not going to let anyone intimidate her out of her own home. She marched back through the house, past Tae-jin, who was currently trapped under a chair by Caleb, and went straight to the front door, pulling it open with purpose. Sung-min was walking up the driveway, alone, dusting snow off his boots. He looked up, his face instantly brightening when he saw her, but his smile faltered when he noticed her red eyes and tense posture. "Jen? What is wrong?" He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, his hands immediately reaching out to cup her face. "Are the kids okay? Are you hurt?" "Your mother called me," Genevieve blurted out, deciding in that moment that there would be no more secrets between them. "She threatened me. She said I was ruining your life, and that you were supposed to be marrying someone else today. And then I walked out here, and I saw you hugging a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine, and I wanted to pack my bags and run away again." She said it all in one breath, her chest heaving. Sung-min stared at her, perfectly still, absorbing every word. The absolute fury that flashed through his gray eyes when she mentioned his mother was terrifying, but it vanished instantly, replaced by a profound, overwhelming softness when he looked at Genevieve. He did not step back. Instead, he pulled her flush against his chest, wrapping his arms securely around her waist, completely burying her in his warmth. "Oh, my beautiful, brilliant, completely ridiculous girl," he murmured into her hair, letting out a soft, relieved laugh. Genevieve pushed against his chest indignantly. "Do not laugh at me. Oh, Sung-min. I am having a crisis." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his thumbs gently brushing her jawline. "That woman was my cousin, Jia. She flew here to deliver legal documents because I officially transferred the last of my mother's shares into a blind trust. I severed the final financial tie. Jia hates my mother just as much as I do. I hugged her because she brought me the paperwork that guarantees my mother can never touch my assets, or my family, ever again." Genevieve blinked, the remaining pieces of her jealousy evaporating into thin air. "Your cousin?" "My happily married, very pregnant cousin," he confirmed, a wicked, teasing glint entering his eyes. "Though I am incredibly flattered that you were jealous. It is nice to know my little bird still has claws." Genevieve groaned, burying her face in his chest to hide her burning cheeks. "Please do not call me that. It has been 4 years. I will call you whatever I want, little bird," he countered, his voice dropping an octave, rich and dangerously smooth. "Especially since you decided to stay and yell at me instead of running away. That is massive progress." "I was so close to packing a bag," she admitted, her voice muffled against his sweater. "But you did not," he said, his tone turning fiercely protective. "And you never have to, because I am going to handle my mother right now." He reached into her coat pocket, pulling out her phone. He unlocked it, navigating to her recent calls, and hit redial on the blocked number. He put the phone on speaker and held it up. It only rang twice before the sharp voice answered. "Genevieve, if you are calling to negotiate, I do not bargain with—" "Listen to me very carefully," Sung-min interrupted, his voice dropping all of its usual warmth, turning into something cold, hardened, and absolutely lethal. "This is the last time you will ever dial this number. You will never speak to my wife again." Genevieve snapped her head up, staring at him with wide eyes. He winked at her, his expression completely unfazed. "Sung-min, what are you doing?" his mother hissed, her composure slipping. "You are throwing away your destiny for a— My destiny is making pancakes for my 4 children," he stated flatly. "Jia delivered the papers. You have no leverage, no shares, and no access to me. If you ever contact Genevieve again, I will personally ensure your social standing in Seoul is completely dismantled. Do not test me. I am my mother's son, after all. I know exactly how to ruin a reputation. He ended the call, blocking the number, and tossed the phone back into Genevieve's pocket with a fluid, dismissive motion. There, he smiled, instantly reverting back to the sweet, quirky man she loved. Threat neutralized. Now, where were we? He pulled her back against him, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss against her lips. Genevieve melted into it, her arms wrapping around his neck. The sheer relief, combined with the way his hands felt on her waist, made her head spin. Oh, for the love of everything holy. A voice groaned from the doorway. Some Min and Genevieve pulled apart, looking toward the porch. Taejin and Kwon were standing there, both holding empty coffee mugs and looking completely exasperated. Can you two let the singles breathe? Taejin complained, rubbing his temples. We came outside to escape the children, and now we have to watch a romance movie scene on the driveway. Have some mercy. We are very fragile, Kwon added, nodding solemnly. Some Min laughed, tossing a handful of loose snow at his friends. Mind your business. My fiancé was just having a moment of intense jealousy, and I was comforting her. Genevieve hit his arm playfully. Stop calling me that. Which one? Little bird? Fiancé? Or wife? He teased, stepping closer to her again, completely ignoring Taejin and Kwon, who were now loudly gagging. Because I plan on making all three permanent very soon. Before Genevieve could formulate a response to that terrifyingly sweet declaration, the front door banged open entirely. Caleb marched out onto the porch, wearing Som Min's flower-covered pink apron, which trailed on the ground behind him like a cape. He was holding the wooden spoon like a sword, pointing it directly at Som Min. "Pizza man!" Caleb yelled, his voice ringing across the snowy yard. Hazel put all the chocolate chips in the bowl, and now the structural integrity is ruined. Som Min gasped, placing a hand over his heart in mock horror. Not the structural integrity. We need you, Caleb demanded, waving the spoon. Som Min looked at Genevieve, his eyes shining with absolute adoration. Duty calls, he whispered, pressing one more quick kiss to her forehead. He turned and scooped Caleb up with one arm, spinning the giggling boy around before marching back toward the house. Taejin and Kwon followed them inside, arguing about whether chocolate chips actually altered the physics of a pancake. Genevieve stood on the driveway for a moment longer, the cold wind blowing past her, but she felt entirely warm. She looked at the house, listening to the loud, chaotic, beautiful noise spilling out of the open door. He had defended her. He had claimed her. He was inside, covered in flour, fixing a crisis over chocolate chips. She would later realize that this was the exact moment the fear permanently left her heart. She was not running anymore. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She smiled, shaking her head, and walked back inside to join her family. The private jet was a masterclass in quiet luxury, featuring cream leather seats, warm walnut wood panels, and an atmosphere designed for absolute tranquility. Naturally, Wyatt and Caleb were currently using the aisle as a runway for a high-speed toy airplane race, complete with incredibly loud engine sound effects. Genevieve sat in a plush window seat, sipping sparkling water and watching the chaos with a relaxed smile. She wore a comfortable lavender sweater and soft leggings, fully embracing the travel aesthetic. 6 months ago, she would have been frantic, trying to keep the boys quiet and apologizing to the flight attendants. Now, she simply turned her head to watch her fiancé handle it. Som Min was sitting on the floor of the aisle, his long legs crossed, wearing tailored dark gray trousers and a casual white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He was holding a plastic helicopter, deeply invested in the narrative the boys had created. Air traffic control. This is Captain Caleb, the little boy announced into his fist. We need clearance to land on the coffee table. Permission denied, Som Min replied in a deep, gravelly voice that made Hazel giggle from her seat. The coffee table is currently occupied by Uncle Kwon, who is trying to sleep because he drank too much espresso at the terminal. Redirect your flight path to the sofa cushions. Kwon cracked one eye open from his reclining seat, pulling a sleep mask up to his forehead. I am trying to sleep because I spent the last 3 weeks auditing the supply chain for your new shipping routes, while you were busy interviewing kindergarten teachers. It was a necessary interview, Som Min shot back without missing a beat, flying his helicopter over Kwon's head. The teacher said she did not believe in unstructured play. I cannot subject my children to a rigid corporate structure at age 4. That is how villains are made. Tae-jin, who was sitting across the aisle teaching Stella how to play a simplified version of blackjack with a deck of cards, snorted. You literally run a corporate empire, Sung-min. Yes, and look how much therapy I needed, Sung-min deadpanned, making the boys laugh, even though they did not understand the joke. Genevieve let out a soft breath, her heart doing the familiar, fluttery thing it always did when she watched him with the kids. He had seamlessly integrated into their lives, bringing a level of joy and stability she had never dared to dream of. He had bought a beautiful, sprawling estate just outside of her Canadian town, complete with a massive backyard and a wooden treehouse that he had built himself, with questionable architectural assistance from Tae-jin and Kwan. Now, they were flying to the south of France for a month-long summer vacation. Sung-min had rented a historic chateau near the coast, insisting that the entire family, including his 2 best friends, needed a proper break before the wedding planning completely took over their lives. Later that afternoon, the chateau was pulled straight from a fairy tale. Nestled on a hilltop overlooking the sparkling Mediterranean Sea, the estate featured ancient stone walls, sprawling lavender fields, and a massive outdoor pool surrounded by peach-colored lounge chairs. As soon as the vehicles pulled up to the circular driveway, the children practically exploded out of the doors. Genevieve tried to grab Hazel's hand, but the little girl was already sprinting toward a stone fountain in the center of the courtyard, mesmerized by the water features. Sung-min stepped out of the vehicle, stretching his arms above his head, breathing in the salty coastal air. He walked over to Genevieve, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, and resting his chin on her shoulder. It is beautiful, she murmured, leaning back into his solid chest. You really went all out. Only the best for my family, he replied softly, kissing the side of her neck. Though I give it exactly 10 minutes before Caleb tries to swim in that fountain. Make it 5, Genevieve laughed, watching Caleb slowly dipping his sneaker into the water. Over the next few days, the chateau became a haven of loud laughter, splashing water, and chaotic family dinners. Sung-min and Genevieve spent their evenings on the grand balcony after the kids were finally asleep, drinking local wine and talking for hours. They did not just talk about the wedding, they talked about everything they had missed during those 4 years apart. He told her about his late nights in the office, the crushing loneliness he tried to mask with success. She told him about the terrifying, exhilarating early days of motherhood, the struggle of building her digital storytelling career while rocking 4 infants to sleep. They were healing, stitching their lives back together with every conversation. He was intensely romantic, but never in a stiff, robotic way. He would leave hand-drawn, goofy cartoons on her pillow, or randomly pull her into a slow dance in the kitchen, while the kids threw cereal at his feet. A few days later, the group decided to venture down the hill into the local coastal town for an outdoor market festival. The cobblestone streets were lined with vibrant stalls selling everything from woven baskets to fresh produce and artisanal crafts. The air smelled of sea salt, baked bread, and roasted nuts. Genevieve and Sung-min were wrangling the boys near a stall selling wooden toys, leaving Tae-jin, Kwan, Stella, and Hazel to explore the food section. Tae-jin was holding Stella on his shoulders, trying to navigate through the dense crowd, when he abruptly stopped to avoid stepping on a stray dog. In doing so, he bumped hard into a woman carrying a massive stack of white pastry boxes. The boxes teetered dangerously, but Tae-jin managed to shoot his hand out, catching the top box just before it slid off. Watch where you are walking, a sharp, melodic voice snapped. Tae-jin looked down. The woman was absolutely stunning. She had wild, curly dark hair tied back with a flower-dusted bandana, and fierce, expressive brown eyes that were currently glaring daggers at him. She was wearing a simple white apron over a black sundress. I am so sorry, Tae-jin stammered, genuinely flustered for the first time in his adult life. The dog. I was trying not to step on it. The woman huffed, adjusting the boxes in her arms. She looked at Tae-jin, taking in his tall frame and handsome features, and her glare softened by a fraction of a millimeter. Just hand me the top box, please. My name is Camille, and if I drop these macarons, my boss will actually murder me. Tae-jin carefully placed the box back on the stack. I am Tae-jin, and this is Stella. Stella waved enthusiastically from his shoulders. We are going to buy a giant pretzel. Camille laughed, a bright, beautiful sound that made Tae-jin's heart do an unexpected backflip. Pretzels are boring, she told Stella. Come to my stall at the end of the square. I have pastries shaped like stars. I will definitely be there, Tae-jin said, his voice dropping slightly, staring at Camille with undivided attention. Meanwhile, a few stalls down, Kwon had wandered off into a quiet corner dedicated to antique books and maps. He loved history, and he was currently carefully flipping through a leather-bound atlas from the 19th century. Fascinating, is it not? A soft voice asked from beside him. Kwon turned to see a woman with straight, sleek dark hair and a pair of thick-framed glasses that made her look incredibly intelligent. She was wearing a crisp white blouse and holding a magnifying glass. The cartography of this region was notoriously inaccurate, until the late 1800s, Kwon noted, sliding the book over so she could see. I know, the woman smiled, her eyes lighting up. I am Beatrice. I am actually a historical archivist. I have been looking for this exact edition for a private collection, but I see you got to it first. Kwon looked at the book, then looked at Beatrice. He gently closed the atlas and handed it to her. I insist you take it. Beatrice blinked, clearly surprised. Really? It is quite valuable. I am sure it is, Kwon smiled, adjusting his own glasses. But I think I would much rather buy you a cup of coffee and hear about your archiving work instead. Beatrice smiled back, a genuine, warm expression. I would like that very much. Later that night, the dinner table on the chateau terrace was incredibly lively. The kids were exhausted from the market, happily eating buttered noodles, while the adults shared a massive platter of grilled seafood. Sung Min leaned over, bumping his shoulder against Genevieve's. Look at them, he whispered, gesturing to his friends with his fork. Genevieve looked across the table. Tae-jin was aggressively texting someone, a goofy, love-struck smile plastered on his face, while Kwon was excitedly explaining carbon dating to Caleb, having clearly been inspired by his afternoon date. You brought them on a family vacation and they both found romance, Genevieve whispered back, suppressing a laugh. You are like a very aggressive corporate Cupid. I just surround myself with an aura of love, Sung Min stated proudly, puffing out his chest. Speaking of love, we need to finalize the venue for our own wedding. Genevieve put her fork down, turning to fully face him. Sung Min, we have been talking about this for weeks. You keep suggesting these massive, grand estates and indoor ballrooms. I want to give you the world, Jen, he said sincerely, his gray eyes softening. You deserve a royal wedding. You deserve every beautiful thing I can possibly buy for you. I do not want the world, she replied, reaching under the table to interlace her fingers with his. I do not want a ballroom, and I do not want 500 guests we barely know. I want it to be us. I want it to be chaotic and fun and completely ours. Sung Min looked at her, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. Okay, what do you want? I want to do it in our backyard at home, Genevieve said, her eyes shining with excitement. We can string up thousands of those fairy lights you love. We can have food trucks instead of a plated dinner. And I want a bouncy castle for the kids. A bouncy castle at our wedding, Sung Min repeated, a slow, brilliant smile breaking across his face. Yes, she nodded. And I want you to wear your ridiculous novelty socks with the little ducks on them, the ones you hide in your sock drawer because you think they are not professional enough. Sung Min let out a loud, genuine laugh that echoed across the terrace. You want a backyard food truck wedding with a bouncy castle and duck socks? It is exactly who we are, Genevieve said softly. We are not rigid or formal. We are just us. Sung Min lifted her hand, pressing a long, tender kiss to her knuckles. Backyard it is, little bird. I will rent the biggest bouncy castle in the province, but I am drawing the line at paper plates. We are at least using real china. Compromise accepted, she smiled, leaning in to kiss his cheek. The next day, the vacation settled into a beautiful, lazy rhythm. Tae-jin spent every afternoon visiting Camille at the bakery, eventually convincing her to let him help her bake, which resulted in him being covered in powdered sugar and her laughing until she cried. Kwon and Beatrice spent their days exploring historical ruins, deeply engrossed in conversations about medieval architecture. For Genevieve and Sung Min, the days were a blur of family time and quiet, stolen moments of romance. He was incredibly attentive. When she fell asleep reading on a lounge chair by the pool, she woke up to find he had moved an umbrella to shade her face and placed a cold glass of lemonade on the table beside her. They were sitting in the shallow end of the pool one afternoon, the water shimmering under the bright sun. The kids were taking a highly negotiated nap inside, monitored by Tae-jin. Sum Min waded through the water, stopping when he reached Genevieve. He leaned against the edge of the pool beside her, wrapping his arm around her waist beneath the water. "You look incredibly relaxed," he noted, tracing gentle circles on her hip with his thumb. "I am," she sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I cannot remember the last time I felt this peaceful. No stress, no deadlines, no running. Just you and the kids." He kissed the top of her head, his hold on her tightening slightly. "I am so glad I called you that day to be a petty jerk." Genevieve snorted, splashing a handful of water at his chest. "You were so embarrassing. Your face when Wyatt asked if you were the pizza man was priceless." "It was a traumatic experience," he joked, wiping the water off his face. "I had a whole speech prepared. I was going to tell you about my logistics margins. It was going to be devastating. Truly terrifying," she teased, turning in his arms so she was facing him. She looped her arms loosely around his neck. His playful expression melted into something much deeper, something intensely vulnerable. He looked at her features, memorizing the way the sunlight hit her skin. "I missed so much, Jen," he said, his voice dropping to a quiet whisper. "I missed seeing you pregnant. I missed the hospital trips. I missed holding your hand through all of that. I hate that you had to do it alone." "I was not entirely alone," she replied gently, brushing wet strands of hair away from his forehead. "I had my sister, and I had the strength you gave me. Every time I looked at them, I saw you. You were always there, Sum Min. Even when you were not." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "I promise I will never miss another moment. I am here for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every single thing. I know you are," she whispered, tilting her head to capture his lips in a slow, searing kiss. A few weeks later, the vacation had come to an end, and the family had returned to their chaotic, beautiful life in Canada. The wedding planning was in full swing. The backyard was currently being mapped out for the fairy lights, and Sum Min had indeed secured a massive, obstacle course-style bouncy castle that the boys were already trying to sneak into. It was late in the evening. The house was finally quiet, the gentle hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the kitchen. The kids had been bathed, read to, and were fast asleep in their beds. Sum Min was standing on the back porch, leaning against the wooden railing, looking out at the expansive yard. He was wearing soft gray sweatpants and a plain black t-shirt, looking completely at ease. Genevieve walked out of the sliding glass door, carrying 2 mugs of warm tea. She handed one to him and stood beside him, leaning her side against his arm. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders instinctively, pulling her close to share his warmth against the crisp evening air. "Tae-jin told me Camille is coming to visit next month," Sum Min said, taking a sip of his tea. "He is completely lost, Jen. He spent 3 hours today looking at apartments in her city online." "And Kwan?" she asked, smiling into her mug. "Kwan is currently on a video call with Beatrice, discussing the Byzantine Empire. He is gone too. My single uncles are falling like dominoes." "Well, you set a very convincing example of how great domestic life can be," Genevieve pointed out. Sum Min hummed in agreement, resting his cheek on the top of her head. "It is the best life. I would not trade this house, this yard, or this chaos for any boardroom in the world." He turned his head, looking down at her. "Are you okay? You have been a little quiet today. And you fell asleep on the sofa at 3 in the afternoon, which is highly out of character for my fiercely productive fiancé." Genevieve took a deep breath, the nervous energy she had been holding on to all day suddenly bubbling up in her chest. She carefully placed her tea mug down on the wooden railing. "I am okay," she said softly. "Just processing some things." Sum Min instantly put his own mug down, turning his full body toward her. The easygoing posture vanished, replaced by complete, undivided attention. "What is wrong? Are you stressed about the wedding? We can scale it down even more. We can just go to a courthouse tomorrow." Genevieve laughed, placing her hands flat against his chest. "No, I do not want to go to a courthouse. I want the bouncy castle." "Then what is it?" he asked, his hands moving to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "Talk to me, little bird." Genevieve looked up into his stormy gray eyes, the exact same eyes that looked at her from 4 different little faces every single morning. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan. Her hand was trembling slightly. She pulled out a small, long white box and placed it gently into his hands. Som Min looked down at the box, confused. "What is this?" "Just open it," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. He carefully lifted the lid of the box. Inside, resting on a small piece of tissue paper, was a thin plastic stick with a small digital screen. The word pregnant was displayed in clear, undeniable letters. Som Min froze. He stopped breathing, stopped moving, completely paralyzed. He stared at the plastic stick as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Som Min?" Genevieve asked nervously, suddenly afraid she had overwhelmed him. 4 kids was a lot. 5 was a small army. He slowly lifted his head, his gray eyes wide, shining with unshed tears. He looked at Genevieve, his mouth opening, but no sound coming out. "I found out this morning," she explained, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. "I wanted to tell you earlier, but the kids were running around, and I wanted it to be just us." "You? Are we?" he stammered, his brilliant, eloquent corporate brain completely short-circuiting. "Are you happy?" she asked, a vulnerable tear slipping down her cheek. "Happy?" Som Min repeated, the word finally breaking the spell. He dropped the box onto the railing and grabbed Genevieve, lifting her entirely off the ground. He spun her around on the porch, letting out a loud, breathless laugh that sounded suspiciously like a sob. He buried his face in her neck, holding her so tightly she could feel the frantic, joyous beating of his heart against her own. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he choked out, setting her feet back on the wooden floor but refusing to let her go. He leaned back just enough to look at her, tears freely spilling over his eyelashes. "I get to be here," he whispered, his voice thick with raw emotion. "I get to go to the appointments. I get to paint the nursery. I get to hold your hand when they are born. I get to do it all with you this time. You get to do it all," she promised, wiping a tear from his cheek with her thumb. "You are never missing anything, ever again." Som Min let out another wet laugh, resting his forehead against hers. "We are going to need a bigger bouncy castle," Genevieve giggled, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist. "Probably. And maybe a bigger treehouse. I will build a mansion in the trees if I have to," he swore softly. He tilted his head, kissing her with a depth of love and gratitude that words could never fully capture. It was a promise, sealed under the quiet Canadian sky, that the broken pieces of their past had finally been laid to rest. As they stood together on the porch, holding each other in the cool night air, Som Min pulled back slightly, that familiar, quirky glint returning to his eyes. "You know," he said casually, brushing a piece of hair behind her ear, "the statistical probability of having quadruplets twice is extremely low, but not zero." Genevieve groaned, dropping her head against his chest. "Do not even say that out loud, you Som Min. I will literally run away again." He laughed, a booming, joyous sound that echoed through the quiet yard, holding her fiercely against him. "Never again," he promised, his voice full of absolute certainty and endless love. "I have you right where you belong."